Hey guys, what's going on? It's Preston here from the Leigendarium. Welcome to the very first episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. Here at the Leigendarium, we're shining a light on indie publishing. Not only do we hope to interview your favorite author, but we hope you find a new favorite author through this podcast. This week, our guest is Hank Garner. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy 30 Minutes with Hank Garner. Welcome, Hank Garner. Thanks for joining us for the very first episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews.
Thanks for having me, Preston.
Appreciate you being my first guest.
Yeah, awesome. I'm happy to do it. I love what you've been doing at the Leigendarium. I've been a fan since you cranked it up, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, for those that might not know who you are, why don't you give them a little preview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a writer of weird, fantastical stories, and I also host a podcast called Author Stories, and I am the father of 5 kids and the keeper of several dogs, and live in the rural South.
Very nice. And your first book that you self-published was Bloom, right?
Yes.
How did you come about that story, and how did you, I guess, ultimately decide on you wanting to be an author?
Yeah, well, I've been a writer of some sort for several years, for a good while, actually. I used to write a column for our local newspaper. I've blogged about various topics on and off for over 10 years, different things like that. I even wrote some stage plays about 20 years ago. So I've always kind of dabbled, here and there, and have worked at writing in some capacity for all of my adult life. And my wife and I used to joke with her, and I would say that I was threatening to write a novel at some point. And so one day I had this dream, and some of my best ideas come from dreams, and I just had this scene in my head about this guy who was about to commit suicide. It was very vivid, it was very visceral, and I guess what really captured my imagination was first off the guy, and kind of, you immediately have these questions. Well, why is he here, and what's going on with him, and that sort of thing. But some very tangible, visceral things stuck out to me. Like he was imagining what the barrel of the gun tasted like, and the thought came to my mind. Well, we all know what gunpowder smells like. We've been around fireworks and things like that, and there's a very unique smell. Or if you grew up in the South like me, you've been around guns and hunting and things like that, and you know what that smells like when you fire a gun. But what does that gunpowder taste like? What would it be like if you actually put the barrel in your mouth? And I'm not endorsing that whatsoever. It was just a thought, that if this person is sitting there and he's going through all the pieces of committing suicide, what would go through his head? So I kind of walked around with the image of this guy for several days, and it kind of haunted me a little bit. So I was talking to my wife. We have a big family, and we have a swing that's in our yard. It's a double swing, kind of thing, and we go out and sit in it in the late afternoon in the summertime a lot, and we're just talking. It's a place for she and I to get away and just catch up on each other's days and stuff like that. And so I start telling her this idea that I had, and she said, "Well, it sounds like you need to write a book." So I wrote down those ideas, and I just started kind of exploring this guy and where he was, and so for several days I worked on it. And I would come back to the swing, and we would talk, and I'd go back and work on it, and and I was like, well, what if this is happening, and what if that is happening, and she would say, well, maybe it's because of this. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And so we kind of worked through those ideas for several weeks. And then one day I had the idea. I knew what the story was about, and I started writing it. And a few months later, I had a book finished. And in that meantime, I had discovered KDP and Kindle Direct Publishing and people like Hugh Howey, who were telling people that you don't have to do things the old way. There's a new way, and it's a better way. And I started educating myself, and then I had this book, and I published it. And a few people started finding it, and so here we are.
Very nice. Now there's another book that I think came about the same time, The Witching Hour. Did you write that before Bloom, or was Bloom your first one that you actually published?
Bloom was the first thing I published, and then after that, I another crazy thing. I had this dream about this palm reader. And there's kind of been this infamous palm reader around the town where I live and where I grew up, and she's been around forever, and no one will ever admit to going to see her, but she's been in business forever. And you'll drive by and there's never any cars in her parking lot, so you kind of have this. You kind of imagine that people show up at midnight, when nobody's looking, and they go in and they go visit her to get their fortune told, and so there's kind of been this running joke or commentary about this palm reader. So I had this dream about a palm reader who had been a fake and a phony, and like probably a lot of us assume those people are,
right.
But and she pretended to be this person, and she even took the name Rhiannon. Which is a mythological Welsh figure, witch, or it's been interpreted many different ways. And Stevie Nicks had that famous song Rhiannon. So I had the idea: what would happen if the real person who she has pretended to be all these years showed up and sat across the table from her and kind of called her out on her stuff. And so that was a short story that I wrote and published right after Bloom, and it was a lot of fun. I've debated on whether to revisit those characters.
I think you should.
I think I should too. It was a lot of fun. It came very quickly, and it just kind of poured out.
Yeah, I remember when I read it. It's a fairly fast read since it's a short story.
Yeah,
I liked it, and I was like, man, that was actually a good story. I hope he comes back to it. So, in my opinion, I think you should go back and visit it, but that's just me.
Well, that came right after Bloom, and Bloom has some. You think it's kind of a straightforward, kind of coming of age story, and this guy kind of having to figure out who he is and what his place is in the world, and deal with some past trauma and things like that. So it reads kind of literary and kind of coming of age with a touch of romance. There's a thread there where he meets the love of his life, although it's not a sappy romance, but there's because life has those elements, it's in there. But there's also kind of this weird thing that happens in it where Huck sees his future, and he's met by this person who may or may not be a time traveler, or is he an angel? Is he, you don't know, and I never actually resolved that in the book. I just kind of leave it open for the reader to kind of ponder on and figure out. But between that and then The Witching Hour, those two things kind of set the stage for this town that I made up called Weston, Mississippi. It's not a real place, but it's a place that I made up. And Weston is the kind of place where weird things like that happen, where things can happen that won't happen normally in life, and where all the things that you imagine could happen, if they could happen, they could happen in Weston.
I think I actually looked up Weston when I got done reading one of your books just to see if it really did exist. I Googled it just to see.
I think there's actually a high school somewhere in the north part of the state called Weston, but it's not an actual town. But it is in my imagination.
That's right. That's all that matters.
That's right.
So you said you write kind of weird and fantastical stories. If someone was to go on your computer as you're researching your books, what's the strangest thing on your browser history you've had to look up writing a book?
Oh, wow. What would be the weirdest thing? Probably. I've looked up most recently for a story that I wrote for Daniel Smith for his Canyons of the Damned. I was researching ghost stories and things like that. I mean, that's not super weird. I've researched ways to commit murder and hide bodies and stuff like that. So, you definitely don't want certain people looking at your history and then comparing, trying to put trails together. But, a lot of, like ancient aliens, kind of stuff because, I'm really fascinated with, the ideas of that we have been in contact with other people or with other dimensions, and some of that stuff kind of plays into Weston. Not necessarily the alien connection per se, but the idea that a lot of ancient people believed that we were in contact with stuff that was not us, and I love the way that some people interpret that. A very traditional religious interpretation would be that this is God and angels and things like that. But some other cultures, had different interpretations. But we all have come from places where people believe that there was more to life than you can actually physically touch. Right. And those things that fascinates me. So I love looking at what other people believe and how other people interpret things. And I just love researching strange occurrences and things that old newspaper clippings and stuff like that. So that's probably some weird stuff.
Now, when you write, do you have the whole story planned out in your head, or do you just kind of let the story go where it seems to naturally be going as you write?
Yes. I usually start with a kernel of an idea.
Okay.
And then I will kind of walk around with the story for several days, maybe a couple weeks, and just kind of stewing on it and getting familiar with the characters in my mind. Then I usually know where the story ends. I'll usually have a pretty vivid picture of what a twist and a turn is at the end and how it resolves.
Right.
Or doesn't resolve, I'll usually have a pretty good idea though. So I'll write those things down, and then I will, just jump in and start. Then I kind of outline as I go. I don't have a traditional outline from the beginning with it completely laid out. Okay. But I do know where I'm going, and I know some signposts along the way to get there. And then as I'm writing, I'll know a few steps ahead of where I'm going, and I kind of keep the train on the tracks that way.
Gotcha. So have you ever written one of your characters into a situation that you've had to stop because now you have no idea how you're going to get them out of it?
Yeah, every day.
Do you really?
Well, yeah, I think that happens fairly often. That I think if you're really if you're letting the story unfold, for you as you go, I think that's a pretty common occurrence that you'll write and you'll say, "Gosh, I don't know what to do with him," and so you have to stop for a while and think about it. That doesn't happen. I kind of said that flippantly. It doesn't happen a lot. I usually know how to get them out of it, but it has happened. That happened in Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. I had to stop for a little bit and kind of figure out and go do some more ancient aliens research and kind of figure out how to do that. But yeah, I mean it's one of those things that does happen, sure. And you just have to trust in your creative process. You have to trust in the fact that that you're going to figure it out, and you have to learn ways to to stop thinking about it, you know.
Right.
That's why I think a lot of times I get ideas from dreams, because that's when I stop obsessing about it and go to sleep, I don't have any control over obsessing about it, and ideas or solutions will come to me in my sleep.
Gotcha. So you mentioned Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. So that book, now after Bloom, that Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, the next book you wrote, but then you ended up publishing Mulligan next?
No, I published Mulligan before I started Seventh Son.
Okay.
So, yeah, Mulligan came right after The Witching Hour. And Mulligan was another idea that I got with just kind of a simple question that I had, and a kind of an image from a dream, I guess. I don't know if it was necessarily from a dream, but I woke up thinking about it. So, take that how you want. But the idea I had was, what if you could time travel, but when you got there you had amnesia and didn't know that you time traveled, but didn't know who you were. You just kind of wake up in this weird place and you're stuck there, and you have to figure out why you're there. So that was the premise of the idea for Mulligan, is that he finds himself in a farmhouse in the 1930s or 1920s, and he doesn't know who he is, and then he comes to realize that he's not from there, in more ways than one. And then you learn as the book goes on, he kind of jumps 3 times to these 3 different situations in 3 different periods in time. And each one of these, he learns something about himself as he helps other people figure out kind of how to navigate this place in their own life. So, the kind of the takeaway is that as he figures out that what's really most important is getting outside of himself and helping others, then he finds a solution for himself. And you come to find out that Connor Mulligan is not a nice guy. He's kind of misguided and gotten off the track of his life. But he figures it out as it goes.
Right. Yeah. If I'm remembering correctly, the book starts off with him in a car driving to.
He's made a deal with a loan shark.
The loan shark. That's right. And he's going to meet with him.
Right, and he's kind of selling his soul, to, if you will, to make this deal to save this business that he has no business doing. It's he and his wife are not on the same page. He's kind of put up his family inheritance, which is this farm that he inherited from his grandfather. He's kind of put all that on the line. The things that should be most important to him, he can't see because he's blinded by this ambition. And he winds up doing stupid stuff because he's, caught up in what he thinks he needs, and when he has everything he needs right in front of him, he just can't realize it.
Yeah. Most of your books, when I read them, I feel like, so they have, like you said, this weird and fantastical feeling to them, but I feel like at the end of each book, I've learned a little something, some kind of like very good takeaway from your books. Is that something you always try to do as an author, or does it just happen?
I think it just happens. I don't intentionally set out and say, you know what, here's a little nugget of truth or wisdom that I want to put in, because I think if you do that from the outset, it comes off as kind of ham-fisted, and I think when an author sets out to do that, you start seeing that on every page, because that's what your focus is and your obsession is, making sure I get this point across. So you start, there's something on every page that leads to that, and the reader can pick up on that immediately. I think that what I do is I just observe life. I think there are lessons that we can learn from life all around us, and maybe some of this comes from being a father, and just kind of how you look at your kids, and you always want them to figure things out for themselves, but you always want to make sure at the end of a situation that they understand what happened and how things turned out. And I don't know. Maybe that's just. But I think when you observe life, there are lessons to be learned, and so when you're talking about people, I don't know. It's just something that naturally happens.
Okay. Was there any book or book series that had a major impact on your life, either growing up or something you've read recently or anything?
I have a series of books called The Paradise War, written by Stephen Lawhead, and it's a 3-book series, and I read that series every year. I have for 20 years probably.
Oh wow!
It's a story. It's kind of a portal fantasy. These 2 students in Oxford, England, wind up falling through a portal that in Scotland that takes them to the Celtic otherworld, and then all of these Celtic mythologies kind of play out in these characters that wind up there, and then at the end they come back to the real world, and there's just so much to those that something sticks out at me every time I read them. I love the writing, I love the setting, I love all the tropes. Those are things that just really connect and resonate with me, and I think it's fantastic writing. So I read that series every year. I have an audiobook, and I have hardbacks, and I have the Kindle versions, and in some form or fashion, I'll read it or listen to it, and it's just one of those things that does me good.
I might have to look into that series. I think I heard you and your son Ian. Y'all talked about that on your the 2 book nerds and a mic.
Yes, and that was I gave them to him. I guess he was maybe about 12, mm-hmm. and he read them and he connected with them in the same way I did, and that's just one of those shared loves and passions that we have.
Yeah, if you could write in any author's world, published or indie author, which one would it be and why?
Wow. That's I would probably pick that caught me so off guard. I would probably pick that world. And I know I would never do it justice, but I feel like I know that world so well, and I think there are other stories that I would like to tell. And I think that's one great thing about as a reader is that is when you leave a book or leave a series that you feel like you've been there, and you feel like you've been there to the point that you could just pick up a thread of one of the stories and keep going. So yeah, I would probably pick Stephen Lawhead's Celtic World, and I know I would never do it justice, but that's what I would like to do.
I think the 2 books that I felt that way about, how you mentioned you feel like you just pick a thread out of them,
yeah,
is Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. That's probably on everybody's list.
Yeah.
But the other one, I'm trying to make sure I get her name right, is The Night Circus. It's by Erin Morgenstern.
I haven't read that.
That's how you say your last name. I love that book. Now, my wife doesn't care for it as much as I care for it, but I love that book. The world that she built, the first time I read it, it was because I saw the cover really grab my attention. So I grabbed the hardback, and when I picked it up, I think I devoured that book in probably less than a week, and I'm a slow reader. And I just reread it again after, I think it was like 4 or 5 years it's been since I've read it. I picked it back up, and I still got those same feelings that I did 4 and 5 years ago.
I love that.
What is your least favorite part of publishing or the writing process when you're doing your books?
Least favorite is probably promotion. I just,
really?
There's, if I could just write and put it out, I would love that. One of the, and because as an indie, you are a writer and you are a publisher, and you are the promotion department, and you are, a lot of times graphic design, and, all the, you take on all of the mantles. And, very few people like being salesmen. Some people are born with that gift, and it's a calling to them, and they're really good at it. And some of us are, just kind of feel gross, sometimes when you're constantly talking about yourself. But it's necessary, if you don't advocate for yourself and for your art, nobody else is, at least in the beginning, and then when you start building an audience, word of mouth takes over and people start talking about it for you. But, a lot of times it's kind of uncomfortable, especially writing is a pretty solitary thing. And, a lot of writers are introverts and they write because they'd rather write than talking to people all day. So that's something that you struggle with, but it's a necessary part of it, and hopefully you meet really good friends, and that becomes easier because everybody is other people want to see you succeed when you connect with them, and so that's a good part that comes out, but it is a difficult part of it.
Is there one type of scene that when you're writing that just seems harder for you to write than other type of scenes?
I don't know. I don't necessarily think about it that way. Probably in the beginning, just some of the world building and setting the stage. Probably because in your mind it's this kind of well fleshed out thing, and you have to stop and say, okay, well, I need to describe all this to the reader because they don't know this yet. Mm-hmm. So striking that balance between just doing an info dump and just laying everything on the reader, and figuring out how to kind of tease out details so that it's very organic, and you get across what's in your head without just hitting them over the head with it. So some of that's a little challenging and a little work, but that's part of the process.
Do you find it a little bit harder for you with each book since they're all part of Weston, or is that kind of easy since they're all in the same world?
It gets easier, especially if for people that have read some of the other books, because they come to expect some certain things. So yeah, I think it gets easier when you're working in the same world.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you are the person in charge of the Author Stories podcast with Hank Garner. How did that come about? Why did you start that podcast?
Well, I started that podcast because I wanted to listen to a podcast where authors talked about their life story and how they got to be where they are. So I found lots of great podcasts about the business of writing. The self-publishing podcast is excellent. Simon Whistler's Rocking Self-Publishing podcast is excellent. Learned a lot from those guys, and still do. But I wanted to hear more about kind of what made writers tick. And I couldn't find that podcast, so I said, well, I'll start it myself. So I did, and here we are.
And then you also have one you do with your son, the Two Book Nerds and a Microphone.
Yes.
How did that one come about?
That one came from Ian and I sitting around the living room talking about nerdy stuff, and one day we said we should record this instead of just doing that. So we came out to my office and we set a microphone between us, and we just started talking about nerdy stuff, and there it was. So we've had a break from that for a while because he's been finishing up his sophomore year in college, and he just finished, and so we're about to crank that back up.
Awesome. And then you are also one half of the duo with Geeks of a Certain Age.
Yes.
How did that podcast come about?
That came from a very similar situation with me and Chris Porteau talking over Facebook or Skype about things that kind of reminiscing about kind of 80s nostalgia, 70s and 80s stuff. And a lot of the science fiction and things like that came out of that era, which was really stoked by Ready Player One, that you mentioned earlier. So Chris's idea was that he would love to do a podcast where kind of two older guys talk about, coming up geek and how as these geeks from a certain era, how we're loving the stuff coming out today and what we think about it and stuff like that. So that's Chris's baby. I'm happy to be part of it. Chris and I just get to do what we would do anyway, but share that with the world.
Has there been any guest on your podcast, the Author Stories podcast? Has there been any guest that just absolutely blew you away when you had them on? Is there one episode that you just love? I know it's hard because they're all your babies, but
they are. But Craig Johnson, the author of the Walt Longmire series, has been my favorite interview. He just listening to his creative process and his story. There's just something that just connected and resonated with me. He's just a super nice guy. And there've been a ton. I mean, I've had 100 episodes, and there's been lots and lots that I just dearly love. But that's the one that when you mention it, just immediately comes to mind. I love talking to him. So it was just one of those that was very natural, very easy, and I learned a lot from him.
And I will say, because of that episode, I went back and gave Longmire another shot, and absolutely fell in love with that series. I'm glad Netflix picked it back up. Unfortunately, now I'm still waiting on season 5 to start filming.
I know. You and everybody else, brother.
For those who haven't watched it, hang in there, because once season 1 gets done, it really picks up, and season 3 might be my favorite season.
Yes. It's kind of a slow burn.
It is.
It is, and because of that TV show, I got into the novels, and the novels are amazing. They're so, and Craig and I talked about this a little bit, but there's so much more detail that you get when the author has, a few pages to give you a little backstory. The two main characters in the TV show, Henry and Walt. You learn about why they're so close and the time they spent together in Vietnam and, going back to grade school. And, so then when you've read 1 or 2 or 3 of the novels and you go back and watch the TV show, it's even richer.
Yeah. I think after that episode and I watched the TV series, I went to, we don't have a bookstore close to us where we live. I was visiting, my in-laws. And I think I went and bought the first 5 books in the series just so I could take them home. And they're in my huge to-be-read stack, but they're there in my ever-growing stack.
The Cold Dish, that first one, is an excellent read. And,
is it really?
And you when you read it, you'll start thinking of things in the series, and you'll go, "Oh, wow!" And it's pretty cool.
I'm going to be ending my podcast kind of like the way I do with the written interviews I've done on my blog up to this point.
Okay.
With some kind of questions that aren't necessarily book related, but they might be.
Okay.
So we're going to hit you up with these kind of weird questions. The first one is, what songs are currently on your writing playlist?
Currently on my writing playlist. Well, I'll just open up my write playlist real quick. Well, I'll tell you right now, the last 2 weeks, I have had Sturgill Simpson's new album, A Sailor's Guide to Earth, on repeat, and I have listened to the album in its entirety over and over and over again for the last 2 weeks.
Nice.
So right now, Sturgill Simpson, A Sailor's Guide to Earth.
Gotcha. If you were stuck in a zombie apocalypse with one of your characters, which one of the characters you've written, which one would you want to be stuck with during a zombie apocalypse, and why?
Oh, which one would I want to be stuck with? Stu Weber.
Okay.
Because he has a magic typewriter.
Awesome. Yeah, he could get you out of some situations with that typewriter.
Yeah, right.
Make sure you put paper in your backpack.
Paper and some ribbons, because you had to think of those things when you're using typewriters.
Yeah. So now, if you could pick any character from anything, comics, movies, television, books, what character would you want?
Superman. Superman.
Why Superman?
Because he's the ideal that we would all strive for. He's almost all powerful, but he has a heart of compassion.
Now, if you had to be shipwrecked on a deserted island and all your human needs were taken care of, such as food and water, what 2 items would you have to have with you?
Can they be people?
Sure.
My wife.
Okay.
And my Kindle.
Your Kindle. Okay. If you had a time machine, where would you travel and why?
I would travel to Bronze Age England.
Okay. Why's that?
Because I think that period of kind of Celtic clans and kind of the beginning of civilization there fascinates me.
Okay.
And I would probably die very quickly, but I think I would love to see it. I would love to experience it and especially because when the Romans invaded England in the early part of their invasion, they rewrote the history. Very most everything we know about pre-Roman Britain is through the stories and the accounts that the Romans wrote. So I would like to see what the real story was.
Okay. If you could write under a pen name, what genre would you write in and why?
I've debated this before, and I've never really settled on anything that would be comfortable writing. You hear stories of writers that do one thing and they write, steamy romance and stuff on the sly under a pen name, and I don't know that I could do that. I don't know, maybe murder mystery kind of things. That probably would be what I would try.
Okay. Do you know what your pen name would be?
I don't.
You'll have
it would probably, I go by Hank, but my real name is Henry.
Okay.
And Hank is a nickname, so it would probably be a flip on something Henry, maybe.
Henry Garnier.
Yeah.
So before we leave, do you have any advice, whether it be for writing or for life, that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think one of the best pieces of advice I could give is to treat people the way you want to be treated, and that goes for everything. If you want to be a writer, then find other writers and help to build them up. If it's through a podcast, if it's through taking other people's stuff and reading and helping review it and help share with your friends, if it's just those things. I think a lot of people get caught up in the in their self-marketing and we like we mentioned earlier, and they forget to be a nice person. And I don't mean that they're mean to people, but it's, a lot of things come out of just having relationships with people. So I think just, think of others, try to find ways to help other people. And in the process of doing that, good things usually happen for you. So just, be a nice person, help other people, and do what you can for others.
Gotcha. Where can our listeners go online and find out more about you or your books?
HankGarner.com. That's where you can find everything. You can find the Author Stories podcast there. You can find links to the books. I blog occasionally, not like I should, but you can find links to everything I do at HankGarner.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews.
Thank you, Preston.
Well, guys, that's our time. Thank you for joining us for 30-Minute Author Interviews. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and please leave a review. It really helps out. And until next time, stay legendary. Oh, screwed that one up. Blooper reel.